his French colleague. Alas, he was for Boulman and Sturmer, Lowe and Reed, Malcolm and Gorker, for everyone on the island from the highest Englishman to the lowest Chinese, the object of mockery, the ogre whom children pointed at. He was in flesh and bone, the emigrant. Like him of whom Beranger and Debraux sang, this commissioner studiously included in his dispatches and petitions the subject of the songs he had listened to from the royal box. He was there to prove that nothing was exaggerated and nothing contradicted. He was Claude Morin Henri de Montchenu. His father, Joseph de Montchenu, styled himself Seigneur de Daudeur. He himself, on May 22nd, 1789, in presenting his marriage contract to their majesties, was Baron de Montchenu, and after wavering for a year or so between Count and Marquis, he definitely decided on the latter title as being more imposing and in keeping with his person. Born in 1757, enrolled at 15 in the Light Horse of the Guard, lieutenant in the Dragoons in 1775. He was its captain in 79 and colonel in 83. It was known that the court had created this rank which, without any apparent utility, had doubled the number of colonels from Versailles in order the sooner to give the nobility access to the high grades. Actually, Montchenu came from a very ancient family and was very distantly related to the House of France, Savoy, and Spain. Baron de Montchenu, discharged in 1788. In the following year, married one Maupeou de Blige, emigrated in 1792, was identified with that corps of the Duc de Bourbon, which appeared nowhere and which, ready to act on September 1st, 1792, was disbanded on November 22nd. Then he refrained from any step likely to compromise his person, and after staying in Westphalia for 8 years, returned to France barely a month after Brumaire by presenting a certificate from the mayor of Versailles issued on the oath of 8 witnesses, testifying the citizen Montchenu had resided at Versailles from May 1st, 1791 until 20th Fructidor 5. Despite certain difficulties arising from the superfluity of Montchenu's regarding superintendents, Claude Morin Henri, backed by the consuls Cambacérès and Lebrun, succeeded in getting himself paid off. He lived in Paris and at Lyon, and in the cafes he frequented, he used to say, "When this man is fallen, I shall beg the king to appoint me his jailer." It was in 1811 that Montchenu scented danger from afar, and his limitless ambitions were at first incomprehensible. Despite his campaigns, his name, and his services, he was not at the first Restoration treated according to his deserts, so he came to petition at Vienna for what? An indemnity. So it was said, for the fodder consumed at the time of the 7 Years' War. He was an intolerable gossiper, a dupe of the first water, and of the formidable kind. Talleyrand had seen him and thought a lot of him, and it was Talleyrand who suggested the Marquis, who had rejoined the king again for the St. Helena post. Did he, as was said, yield to Madame de Jaucourt and de Laval, who had appointed themselves Montchenu's patronesses? That was possible, for he refused them nothing. However, Talleyrand decided on the eve of his fall, and on September 22nd, Montchenu Colonel was appointed by the king his commissioner to St. Helena. On the 23rd, Talleyrand was no longer minister, but he had made his masters the laughing stocks of Europe. The Duc de Richelieu tried in vain to persuade Montchenu, in lieu of going to St. Helena, to accept a post as chargé d'affaires, or even as minister in a little German court, but the latter insisted that his errand was of the greatest importance to France, and besides sending him 2,000 leagues from his creditors, she allowed him a salary of 30,000 francs, which he was in hopes of being soon increased, and which was in 1817 actually augmented by 60,000 francs, a sum he then requested might be raised to 100,000 francs, a demand which was not acceded to. Further, He was appointed Major General on November 22nd, 1815, and thereby obtained an additional salary of 10,000 francs, for which he did not give even a glass of water to anyone, and became a sponger on the governor, the commissioners, and the English officers and merchants, so much so that he was called the Marquis de Montesquieu. He was, said one of the officers, a perfect example of l'ancien régime. That was exaggeration. Montesquieu was only a caricature of it because of his simplicity, his foolishness, his ignorance of contemporary life, his innate hatred of Bonaparte, his greed, and his gluttony. Conventional traits, it may be said, he was an unreal character, so far carrying to the extreme all the ridiculousness of which he seemed markedly possessed, which no one could conceive to be concentrated in any one man. In forming his retinue, he brought a particularly thin aide-de-camp because he had to feed him. He was Jean-Claude Gore of the King's Bodyguard, son of the late Philibert Gore, founder of the Red Cross, and Claudine Joseph Cochet. In June 1814, he succeeded in getting enrolled in the Ragusa Company, took part in the Ghent journey, and in September was one of the King's Watch. How he got this post with its 6,000 francs salary and its odd attire, no one knows. He got his salary raised to 12,000 francs and lived all his life, even under the Second Empire, on the pension allowed him for having gone to St. Helena. Moreover, without being so absurd as Montesquieu, he was less worthy of esteem, for he spent all of his time inveighing against his master. There was Europe. France, Austria, Russia, obliged through commissioners ceaselessly to establish the continued presence of the prisoner and monthly to supply such proof, witnesses whom England was to preclude from seeing anything, hearing anything, knowing anything. Europe was kind to spill its blood in the interest of England in an auxiliary and mercenary role, but England reserved to herself the design, the aim, the domination, even at a time when the Emperor of Russia, under the auspices of a hysteric clairvoyant, conceived the Holy Alliance. England did better, leaving to the kings of Europe the fruitless declarations of principles and treaties and memories, while she made sure of realities, maritime power, for which, under ingenious names, she had incited the whole of Europe against France to her own ends, and as a symbol of that decisive victory by which, for one and probably more centuries, she made herself mistress of the world, she was alone and intended to remain alone, to guard the man among men, who threatened her prosperity and menaced her future.